So I'm going to be talking to you today in an attempt to explain and make sure that we have clear definitions for some very common rhetorical strategies. Remember, I told you if you can have just a foundational knowledge of about 10 rhetorical strategies, then you can be kind of confident walking into a rhetorical analysis passage because you know that of the 10 of these 10, at least a couple will be present in any passage that you're presented with. So we're going to start here. I'm going to kind of go through and talk to you about what these strategies mean, make sure that we have a common definition for them, and give you maybe some examples, some common examples that you might see. And then also, or after you watch this video, Ms. Costin is going to go through and help you fill out that graphic organizer. Make sure that you have some notes. You can try to take notes as you watch this video, but I think maybe it would be more helpful if you just kind of watch and listen and maybe jot down like questions as you think of them. And then if your questions are not answered when Ms. Costin goes over the graphic organizer and the notes with you, you can email me and I will try to clear it up or try to address this in greater detail whenever I see you next week. So I'm going to pull up your graphic organizer so that I can make sure that I am not leaving anything out. Hang on just a second. Okay, so the first rhetorical strategy is one that I know that you've heard of probably 100 times, imagery. Imagery is vivid language that appeals to at least one of the 5 senses. So we got sight, sound, taste, touch, and help me out here. Sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Yes, olfactory sense. So any language that is super descriptive, that as you read the passage, you can imagine what that looks like, or you can almost hear the sound because they're using such great vivid description. That's imagery. So pretty easy to identify in a passage. So now that we have that definition, you have to move beyond knowing what it is and pointing and saying, aha, there's imagery. Because it's not the labeling test. You're not having to label something. You're having to write an essay about it and analyze it. So you need to be able to talk about the effect of the strategy. In the case of imagery, the effect in the passage is that it helps draw in the audience. It's very engaging. It's like the audience gets to experience the scenario. They're really pulled in by the descriptive language. Kind of allows them to experience it vicariously. That's a great word to know, good AP word. So vicarious means that you are not actually experiencing, but it's like you have that experience. So if your friend goes on this awesome vacation and posts a bunch of pictures on Instagram, you're kind of going on the vacation vicariously by looking at the pictures. So let's see, the next one on your graphic organizer is parallelism, also referred to as parallel structure. So you have referenced this, I know, on your syntax packet that you got last week. But parallelism is something that is very easy. Once you learn it, you're going to remember it. It's basically a distinct pattern of sentence structure or repeated sentence structure. It could also be a repeated paragraph structure. So maybe every paragraph of the passage starts off with the same sentence, or maybe it ends with the same question. Either of those would be a good example of parallel structure. Lots of children's books have parallel structure in them because they're easy to remember. They create a sense of order, and they kind of create a rhythm and a cadence. You can anticipate what's coming next, so it's a very engaging strategy. For example, on The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle, and you go through and you say that on Monday he ate 1 apple, on Tuesday he ate 2 pears, on Wednesday he ate 3 plums. So each page you turn and it starts off with on whatever day of the week, so kids can start to remember it. It's very easy to understand and easy to predict. So the impact of parallel structure, again, it creates a sense of order and somewhat of a cadence or a rhythm to the passage. And it also draws attention to whatever follows that parallel structure. So it might draw attention to a major idea by, it's like it perks your brain up, like, hey, I've heard that before. So it brings your attention back to the message. The next next rhetorical strategy that we're going to talk about is allusions. So that's probably one that you're familiar with as well. If not, an allusion is just a reference to something outside of the passage. So the most common allusions are biblical allusions, and funny enough, Star Wars allusions. So those are the two most common that you will see and experience, and things that you read. Harry Potter allusions are fast approaching Star Wars, and probably within the next generation, maybe Harry Potter will be the most referenced in terms of pop culture entertainment. So the impact of allusions, it depends on what the allusion is to. So it can create a sense of credibility for the speaker in terms of they're very well educated on the subject matter. If they're alluding to scientific studies, they're alluding to works of art, shows that they are knowledgeable about culture. It can also, if it's a biblical allusion or an allusion to a religious text, it can elevate the subject matter. It can take it to a spiritual level, so it can deepen the discussion in a sense. It can also create humor. So if it's an allusion to a Saturday Night Live sketch or to a like viral video or a meme, then that's going to make you as the audience kind of like grin, first of all, and it's going to keep you more entertained as you're reading. So it's a strategy that speakers use to draw in the audience again. Kind of can create a little like inside joke between the speaker and the reader. Let's see. The next three are those argumentative appeals. That was a question that I asked you on the survey the other day. If you knew what the three argumentative appeals are, you probably knew, you just might not know that they were called the argumentative appeals. So we have logos, ethos, and pathos. You've probably talked about this already, but if not, so an appeal to logic, you also might hear it called the appeal to logos. This is anything that is fact-based evidence that's included in a passage to support an argument generally. So the impact of these fact-based things, including statistics or referencing a scientific study or an expert opinion, is that it's very convincing. It provides a convincing argument that can be really hard to refute. It also can help establish a sense of authority for not only the speaker, but for the claims that the speaker is trying to make. So it basically creates a very sound argument to include appeals to logos or appeals to logic. The next appeal is appeal to ethos. So this is your ethical appeal. Anything really that tries to create a connection to your values or connects to some sort of values, your beliefs of right and wrong, that's what an appeal to ethos is. So the impact of that is it helps the audience see the speaker as a respectable, qualified, trustworthy source of information because it's showing the connection between the speaker's values and the audience's values. So any kind of a call to patriotism, something that evokes human decency or addresses decency, civil rights, religious teachings, these are all ethical appeals. And the impact is that it's convicting the audience to act based on their beliefs of what's right and what's wrong. So it's an argument of shared values, essentially. The next appeal is an appeal to pathos. This is the emotional appeal. So a pathological appeal or an appeal to pathos is when the speaker deliberately is trying to evoke emotion, trying to make you feel something. Any kind of advertisement or description or passage that deals with animals or babies, or extra specially baby animals, is absolutely going to be an appeal to pathos. The impact of an emotional appeal is that because it makes you feel, it kind of perks you up. If you've been sort of like zoning out, all of a sudden if you laugh or you get angry or you get really sad because of this awful thing that happened, you're drawn back in. So it creates a striking memory in a passage, much more so than just a list of facts or solid argument. Including just a touch of pathos can be a very effective way to make sure that your audience remembers what you're trying to say. So it doesn't have to be a negative emotion. It doesn't have to be sadness or anger or fear. It can also be nostalgia, which is kind of affection for the past. It can be what I like to call the awe factor, like aw, like you see in diaper commercials. Any commercial that has cute little kids in it is trying to get you to remember those sweet little faces and buy the product by using that emotional appeal. All right, the next, what are we talking about here? The next rhetorical strategy here is one that I know you all know. You might not have thought of it as a rhetorical strategy, but repetition. It's the simplest thing. You learn how to repeat when you're a baby. So repetition, you obviously don't need this definition, but it's when you say something more than once. So a word, a phrase, or a sentence structure within the passage. The impact of repetition is that it draws attention to whatever's being repeated. It's like flashing lights. Hey, I want you to remember this concept. It's going to place emphasis on what's important in the passage. Very simple to remember. The next rhetorical strategy, I'm going to loop in a bunch of stuff together to keep it simple for you. Comparisons. That's a strategy that you can analyze. So there are lots of specific types of comparisons, and of course you can call them the specific name, like you can call it a metaphor or simile or an analogy. There are a lot of other ones too, but basically it's just comparing one thing to another thing. So this can have a lot of effects depending on the nature of the comparison. It can be funny if it's kind of an outlandish or silly comparison. Can make you laugh. It can also, and probably most often, the impact is going to be to make a subject or a kind of complex claim easier to understand by giving it a more familiar or relatable example. So it's kind of simplifying the subject matter by making it more relatable to the audience. Okay, just a couple left. We can do this. Irony. Irony, for whatever reason, no matter how much we talk about it, for some reason it's hard for people to really remember what it is. So, just for a little refresh, there are 3 types of irony, but for our purposes, we're really only going to focus on 2, because dramatic irony is only going to exist in literature for the most part. So since this is a nonfiction class, you won't see many examples of dramatic irony. The other 2 types are situational and verbal. So verbal irony is when someone says something, but they actually mean the opposite of what they said. So sarcasm is irony. Situational irony is when what happens is kind of the opposite of what you would expect to happen. So something is like really surprising. And you think like, well, oh my gosh, that's weird, or that's a weird coincidence. That's an example of situational irony. I can give you hundreds of examples of that, but for right now, we're going to focus on just the impact of either type of irony, situational or verbal. So when you're using irony, you're delivering an unexpected result. So you're delivering an unexpected statement or an unexpected resolution. And because it's unexpected, it's surprising and it draws the audience's attention. It can make them laugh. It's almost always a humorous effect. So you need to remember that when a writer uses irony, it's to make this a more memorable statement. Instead of just saying it verbatim, they're trying to, it's not really a trick because they know the audience is in on it. They know the audience understands that they're being ironic or they're being sarcastic. So it's really just an attempt at humor. All right, 1 or 2 left. Just 1, hooray. So we have a rhetorical question. I bet you already know this too. It's kind of a fancy name for it, but you've probably heard this many times. So a rhetorical question is basically just a question that is asked to make a point rather than get a response. So when somebody says, well, it was a rhetorical question, they mean like, you don't have to answer me, which is true. But the purpose of it is to make a point rather than get a response. So what's the impact in the passage? When you use rhetorical questions, you're basically engaging the reader, because when someone's brain hears a question, they are almost subconsciously going to think of how they would answer that question. So as the reader, if you read a rhetorical question, you might think like, in your brain. You might skim over a whole paragraph of just statements or someone else's thoughts. But when they ask that rhetorical question, it kind of interrupts their thought process and makes you think, how do I fit in here? Like, what do I think about it? So for example, let me think. Well, I can't, it's probably not a good idea to give you a for example on the fly. We'll have to look at one in the passage. But the intention really is to make the point that the question is asking. So we'll say if your mom or dad says, have you lost your ever-loving mind? They're not waiting for you to say, no, Dad, I haven't lost my ever-loving mind. I'm completely sensible. He doesn't want you to answer him. He's suggesting the question that he asks. So when he says, have you lost your ever-loving mind, he's meaning you have lost your ever-loving mind. So again, a rhetorical question is used to make a point rather than elicit a response. Usually it's making the point that it's asking, and it also is very engaging to the reader. So I think that's all. You notice on your graphic organizer, let me see. Okay, cool. I found you again. You notice on your graphic organizer that there are like 4 or 5 blanks on the bottom. What I want you to be able to do is add on the other things that we talk about over the series of the next several weeks, other rhetorical strategies that you can kind of like hold on to, and you're confident that you understand them and you understand their impacts. Notice that it doesn't continue on the back. I'm not going to give you another one of these because I really just want you to have this page, this organizer that you can glance back at anytime that you're preparing to do a rhetorical analysis timed response. And just as we progress, we'll do different things. We'll do some quizzes just so that you can remember these. I want you to remember these and whichever few more you add to it so that you can own those basic rhetorical strategies. So now that you've listened through, suffered through this video, I am going to let Miss Costin go ahead and help you fill out the graphic organizer. Make sure that you have the correct or the amount of information that I want you to have in regards to the effect of each of these strategies. So thanks for listening. If you have questions, you can email me. I will be at school again next week for a whole day again, and hopefully I will see most of you soon. Cool. See you later.